Muy buenas tardes a todos. Continuando con el programa, me complace presentarles a Kim Leighton. Kim Leighton es directora ejecutiva del Centro de Innovación y Simulación Clínica ICANN en Hamad Medical Corporation en Doha, Qatar, que atiende a la comunidad multidisciplinaria de profesionales clínicos. Pasó de enfermería de emergencia a la educación y la simulación hace más de 20 años y disfruta facilitando el aprendizaje con la simulación con un enfoque en la evaluación de los resultados. Actualmente, Kim forma parte de la junta directiva de la Society of Simulation in Healthcare, mientras era presidenta de la Asociación Internacional de Enfermería para la Simulación y el Aprendizaje Clínico. Kim lideró el desarrollo de los estándares de mejores prácticas en simulación, lo que llevó a la difusión generalizada de las mejores prácticas a una audiencia mundial interprofesional. También coorganizó la primera reunión de presidentes de organizaciones de simulación en todo el mundo, lo que condujo a la formación de la Red Global para la Simulación en el Cuidado de la Salud.
All right. Well, thank you for the kind invitation to speak at this conference today. I appreciate the offer from the organizing committee. And they asked me to share my thoughts with you about evaluation and what has changed in simulation. So I'm the director of the ICON Clinical Simulation and Innovation Center, and we're located in Doha, Qatar. And we are, my screen won't change. There we go. We are a 110,000 square foot purpose-built simulation center on the campus of Hamad Medical Corporation, which is provides service to our 16 hospital government healthcare system, as well as all of the medical and nursing schools in the country and the primary healthcare system. So it is a busy little place. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be there with you today, but your boys are in town. So as most of you are probably aware, the World Cup starts in 2 more days. I think your team is still in Spain, but they should be arriving shortly. So we're looking forward to welcoming them here. I'm just really glad that we've become pros at using distance technology so that I can still chat with you today. So today I was asked to talk about what has changed in simulation evaluation. And that really made me sit down and think a little bit about the progression of simulation and how we evaluate, not just in the last 2 years, which has been a drastic change, but even over the past decade or so. Now, some of the things are exactly the same as they were when I started in simulation 20 years ago, while others are completely different. Before I go any further, I don't have any disclosures. And after our discussion, I hope you'll be able to more closely consider the purpose and value of the different evaluation methods as we consider how evaluation and simulation has changed over recent times. You will also notice that I tend to use assessment and evaluation interchangeably, and the words do have 2 different meanings, but we could do a whole session just on that. So bear with me as I tend to slip between the 2. So these are some of the areas that I feel we have made a lot of progress in changing or advancing over the past few years. So I'm going to talk about each of them in a little bit more detail. So we have long evaluated satisfaction. We've looked at satisfaction in simulation since we got the first one out of the box, because they were expensive and we needed to know that our learners appreciated them and that they were satisfied when they were learning in that environment. But what does it really mean when the learners say they're satisfied? Well, they tell us, we love sim, we want to do it more, it's the best learning experience we've ever had, it was great, can we come back tomorrow? There's always one student, though, who doesn't like it at all, and they'll let you know who they are. And oftentimes it's because when you ask them, they'll say it's because they're put on the spot and they feel like they're being observed and exposed, and that's a really uncomfortable feeling for them. So when we look at this satisfaction, we have these surveys that say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how satisfied were you? So we don't ask why they were satisfied. So when I asked students, I got answers like, well, I was happy because we got done early, or the teacher was funny, or, well, all my friends were in my group today, so we had a really good time. And then you hope there's students who say, well, I really learned a lot that I can apply to taking care of real people. And that's why I was satisfied in the experience today. But then you also have those that are not satisfied. And when you ask them, you get answers like, oh, you put me in this group of people I don't like. I wanted to be with my friends. Or these simulators, they're plastic dummies. I can't get into taking care of plastic people. How do you expect me to do this? Others will say that the teacher was disorganized, that the person who's supposed to be helping them didn't really seem to know what they were doing. And, other people just don't want to get up so early in the morning. My clicker's not working. There we go. But there is some room for this satisfaction data. So we use this extensively to get faculty buy-in. So if you've got a group of faculty who just want nothing to do with simulation, and there's faculty like that in every group, you can use this information to help convince them to get started or to get moving forward with simulation. By just simply saying, the students do it in these other courses and they really like it and they actually like coming to class. Let me help you figure it out. You can also use it for private funders. So it's helpful when you're showing them around your sim center, when you're giving them that tour, if you could also be having this conversation that says, our students go through simulation every single course in our program, and all they talk about is how similar it is to their experiences in clinical and how much more comfortable and confident they feel when they're taking care of real people. Or they can't wait to come back. They tell us they actually want more of this. That makes it a little bit easier for that funder to get out the checkbook. Now, the people who don't really like satisfaction data is the journal editors. They've seen enough of it and they don't want to see any more of it. In fact, I don't think any of them now will publish simply satisfaction data. It can be part of a larger study, but they won't publish it by itself. So then what about perceptions? Where do perceptions fit in? So when we talk about satisfaction, we're really talking about perceptions. It's what the students perceive about their experience. So the common perceptions that we see evaluated are confidence and competence, and their self-evaluations. So let's just take a look at this example and think about perceptions as we talk. So this is a typical nursing college simulation environment in the Midwest in the US. And this particular room is a labor and delivery suite, and the baby has not been born yet. So it seems pretty straightforward, right? But then if we start adding the learners, so let's say we have a learner that's assigned to do assessments for the mother. And then let's say there's another learner who's assigned to watch the fetal monitor and to identify any abnormalities. Then there's a nurse who's assigned, a nursing student who's assigned to give medications. And one who's assigned to do documentation and to make phone calls to any of the other healthcare providers. And this is a fairly common way that simulation is done in small groups in the US. And so we see this a lot. But what I want you to think about is, whose perspective are we evaluating? Because the person who's got their head down, listening to lung sounds and heart sounds and fetal heart tones with a stethoscope is not going to see the same thing that the nurse with the monitor is going to see. And the nurse who's on the phone is not going to see what medication the nurse is drawing up to administer to the patient. So they each come out of this experience with a very different perspective of what happened to them. And this gives us very limited understanding of how effective our teaching was, especially if nobody is able to see the big picture. And this is really one of the most valuable foundational purposes of debriefing. So now let's look at yet another perspective. So here's your instructor, the facilitator, who's managing this scenario. And he's in a control room. If you look closely, you can see shadows of some students through the one-way window behind his laptop. He has a very large computer screen that has 6 different sections on it, 6 different videos. And then he has his laptop in front of him that also has those 6 pictures. Then he has his script, his scenario outline in front of him, and he has controls that can zoom the different cameras in and out. So that's a lot of distractions, isn't it? Now, even though he can zoom in and out for specific things, there's not one picture up there that shows him the whole picture either. He can't see all the participants at the same time. So now you've got students who don't see the whole picture, and you've got a facilitator who doesn't see the whole picture. So when you get into debriefing, you find that you have a lot of different perspectives. So one of the things that we have been working on fairly consistently is making our evaluations more objective. So we're not just only looking at these subjective pieces of it. So what do we need to do to make these evaluations more objective, or based on what we can actually see or hear? So we've taken the focus off of the actual learners and we've put it on ourselves. So how we function as evaluators and the tools that we use is something that we've been studying a lot lately. So I've done a lot of consultations for new simulation programs, and I always 100% faculty ask, how do we grade our students in simulation? And I always respond with, you don't. You can't grade the learners in simulation until you know what you're doing as a facilitator, until you can perform competently yourself. So if you're just getting your initial consultation and you don't know how to be a good simulation facilitator, and you haven't practiced that, then you really have no business evaluating students at high stakes. Now, a summative is different, or formative is different. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. Formative is different. You're going to evaluate performance in the learning environment, but you can't do high stakes in grading until you are competent yourself. So I put a QR code here for the Healthcare Simulation Standards of Best Practice. If you're not familiar with them, they were first developed by the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning in 2011. And this is the 4th edition. and they were just released last year, so they're very up to date. There's 8 of them, I believe. I'm not exactly positive on that, but there's one specific one for evaluation, there's one for debriefing, facilitation, and several other ones. So that QR code will take you directly there. Now, to become a competent facilitator, you need to practice a lot. It's different than lecturing in a classroom. Now, there's a couple of tools that are available to help you grow as a facilitator. And one is called the Debriefing Assessment for Simulation in Healthcare. It's also known as the DASH tool. Another one is the Facilitator Competency Rubric, or FCR. I put both QR codes there as well so that you can easily find those. The DASH focuses on pre-briefing and debriefing, while the FCR also considers preparation and facilitation and the evaluation piece. What's common in these two tools is that they're observation rubrics. So in order to monitor your progression towards competency or expertise, you would ask a trained facilitator to review your performance using this rubric and then provide feedback to you. Now, there's 2 challenges with this. One, you have to be willing to be observed. And 2, the observer and you need to have the same understanding of how the rubric works, so you know how the performance is going to be evaluated. And then if there's more than one observer, inter-rater reliability training needs to take place so that they are agreeing on how they will score you. Now, these rubrics are not completely objective either. What is the difference between headings like always, or consistently, mostly, or somewhat? What's the difference between those? You have to talk about that ahead of time. So it takes a little bit of work to make sure that rubrics are used objectively. Even checklists that say, yes, they did it, or no, they didn't do it, those need inter-rater reliability work as well. Because if the learner doesn't quite do something completely right, maybe they just forgot one of the 10 steps, some facilitators will say, yep, that's close enough, I'm checking them off, where another facilitator is going to be like, no, every one of those 10 steps is important and they didn't do it, so I'm failing them. And so you've probably all had that happen in your classes at some point or another. So it's vitally important to figure that out ahead of time. Now, when you're being observed and critiqued, how does that make you feel? Does it make you uncomfortable? Would you rather just score yourself and note your own progress? Well, it kind of turns out that that's what most people prefer, and it's one of the reasons why doing psychometric analysis of tools like this is so difficult. But I want you to think about how your students feel when you're using these tools to evaluate them. They're pretty uncomfortable too. But we have to be careful not to revert back to this self-scoring, because then we're right back to perception level evaluation again. And the research is really clear that most of us are pretty biased towards ourselves when we're doing our self-evaluation. There is one commonly used tool that indirectly evaluates our skills as a facilitator. So thanks to Dr. Hugo Alvera Cortez, I'm assuming he's in the audience today, but he's one of your own UNAM faculty. And he took the simulation effectiveness tool modified, or the SET-M, and led a team to translate that into Spanish. So we're very excited to have that available on our website. And this tool has learners know how well their learning needs are met during the simulation experience. There's subscales, it's pre-briefing, debriefing, confidence, and learning. But we use the results of this tool to inform us if we need to make any changes in our scenario design or how we facilitate the learning. So if we don't meet their clinical learning needs, then that's on us to fix that. Now, think back to how you evaluate your learners. When you use an observation rubric, do you and the learner work together to make sure you both understand the expectations? If there's more than one observer, do you do the work of establish inter-rater reliability? And then do you use your student feedback to improve your simulation experience? If not, this might be a good place for you to start to consider changes as you move forward with evaluation. Excuse me. Now, competent facilitators, that's just one area where we have placed more focus in evaluation. One big change, a great improvement, is that we've increased the quantity of evaluation instruments designed for simulation. But it's not just about quantity, is it? It's about quality. We had a big shortage of valid and reliable evaluation tools, even just 10 years ago. And we've been working really hard over the past several years to change all of that. So just a reminder, sorry, I always have to slip this in whenever I'm talking about evaluation instruments. A reminder, reliability means dependability and trustworthiness. It's the degree that the tool measurement is inconsistent. So every time it's used, it should give the same type of result. So think about every morning I step on the scale, sometimes 2 or 3 times, thinking that the number is going to change, and it doesn't, because apparently my scale is reliable. Now, validity is whether an instrument measures what it's supposed to measure. So in this instance, we want to measure this young man's waist, and we do have 3 very reliable measurement tools, but they're not valid for the measurement that we need to do. Only the one is. Now, you can create your own evaluation tools, but just speaking from experience, it's a major undertaking. It's a research specialty unto its own. So find help if you're going to go down that route. So how do you find these valid and reliable instruments? Well, one of the challenges is that they usually aren't published with the articles that describe how they're created. And so then you have to try to track down the authors, and it becomes somewhat challenging. So there's a couple of places that you can go now where there's repositories, and both QR codes are here again. The one on the left, the Evaluating Healthcare Simulation website, is mine, and it houses evaluation instruments that have undergone psychometric analysis. Some are mine, some are colleagues, and they are freely and immediately downloadable and available for you to use. You don't need to ask permission. They're there for your use. The other QR code will take you to the INAXL repository, the same organization that developed the standards of best practice. On their website, the tools are organized by category. So you'll see them listed there. And what you have to do is you do have to find out about the reliability and validity of the tools yourself. That's not documented on this repository. It's just a way for you to find them. So now we've looked at changes in evaluation related to learning, how to dig deeper than satisfaction and self-perceptions, and how we, as the facilitators of learning, we have to improve our own selves through evaluation. We've talked about the need to be more objective in our evaluation methods, and ensuring that we use reliable tools that produce valid data for the population that we're evaluating. Now you have a couple easy places to go to look for your tools. So what else has changed? Well, we did have a pandemic. So many moved their simulation experiences online when schools were shut down or when hospitals couldn't safely accommodate our students. And online simulation took many formats. One of the most familiar is what I call the Brady Bunch format, where everyone is online in their own little box and they're looking in different directions to see who else is in their Zoom room. And this actually worked exceptionally well for standardized patients. So it allowed organizations to hire SPs from anywhere in the world. And it kept them all from being unemployed, and it kept them from being exposed to COVID by leaving their houses. Now, other places sent skills equipment home. Some even sent full task trainers and small mannequins home to the students. Some sent suture material. That was an interesting conversation on several listservs about the safety. There was quite a discussion around that. Now, others had learners use common things like toilet paper rolls and pipe cleaners to learn trach care, while having learners record themselves doing the skill on their phones. Now, the challenge with recording is that all of your students don't live with other people who can record them. So there was always challenges with people who lived alone because we couldn't have our friends come over to help us. Now, it's been almost 2 years since COVID started, and many areas have returned to business as usual. But what have we left behind? Did our online simulation strategies work? Will these students now be able to go out and do trach care? Will they be able to practice the communication skills that they learned with the SPs? You know, what exactly did they really learn? So it's up to us to critically evaluate what happened. What happened? What have we done? You know, some ideas were desperation. Honestly, we had to figure this out fast, and maybe they didn't work so well. Or maybe we got lucky and then something did work exceptionally well. So we really need to look at what should we keep and what should we never do again, ever. And we also have to evaluate the time efficiency. You know, if we spend hours and hours setting up an alternative simulation strategy, you know, for example, maybe an online escape room, then we have to make sure that time was worth it. What were the learning outcomes? I mean, I'll never forget, I wrote a scenario for a patient in cardiogenic shock years ago. It was in 2004. And it took 16 hours just to program the software. And no, that wasn't worth it. It just wasn't. And we never used it again. So we need to let go of what didn't work and focus on the good stuff and continue to make it better. Now, some of the good was the increased use of virtual and augmented reality and screen-based simulation as well, as this allowed students to learn at their own pace and to repeat areas that they didn't understand well. Now, beyond COVID-19, the use of augmented reality and virtual reality, it's just burgeons, it's exponentially grown. And the impact of this is immense because it allows learners to practice and repeat as often and as much as they need to in order to understand the material or finesse the skill. And in this case, in this situation, the computer provides the feedback. So it provides accurate, objective data to the learner while at the same time freeing up the faculty. So this looks to really be a game changer as this technology continues to rapidly move forward. So thank you for listening along with some of my musings about what's changed in simulation evaluation over the past few years. I hope you'll go back and take a look at your own evaluation strategies and ensure that they're providing you with the feedback that you really find valuable. And my contact information is on the screen, and I'm happy to take any questions. No questions?
Una pregunta. Hola, un gusto, Kim.
Yes.
Soy enfermera. Creo que es un tema que a todos nos preocupa, cómo evaluar lo que hacemos. No sé si porque no sabemos o porque no queremos ver si lo que usamos con simulación produce algún impacto. Y creo que es más una reflexión y una pregunta. Usamos mucho la evaluación de satisfacción del estudiante, ¿no? Pero nunca avanzamos más. Están los niveles de Kirkpatrick, ¿no? De ir avanzando a medir. ¿La experiencia de ustedes es solamente satisfacción o llegan a medir impacto del estudiante en el campo clínico o de los profesionales que tienen simulación y luego ver transferencia en los pacientes? Esa es mi pregunta.
Let me see. I'm going to answer. I think I understand the question. So, what I'm hearing is if satisfaction is not enough, you know, what else needs to be evaluated? So, we're looking at things like critical thinking, clinical judgment, prioritization skills, communication skills, teamwork, handoff reports, along with, you know, time to intervention and time to recognize deterioration, some things like that. So it's kind of, you know, we call it the Holy Grail. It's this thing that's really hard for us to reach, is making that connection between what we do in simulation and the outcomes of our patients in clinical, which I think was the back part of that question. You know, how do we know that what we're doing is making a difference for our patients? And it's so hard to do research around that because, you know, in a simulation lab, we have complete control. We as long as you know how to run the software, you can make those mannequins do absolutely anything that you want them to do. But in the hospital, each patient has their own physiology and responds to 1,000 variables that we have zero control over. And so creating that perfect research environment is impossible. And so we have to just, I think you just put that aside and you know, stop using that as an excuse, because we do quite often. But I do know, like in our organization, they did simulation training for the HAPPY, now I'm not going to know the abbreviation. It's hospital acquired something infections. Help me out, Haru. HAPI. But anyway, they were able to document a very big decrease in the number of these infections that were obtained after the training. So training equaled decreased infections. And they've been able to maintain that over a few months now. So that's really encouraging. The disappointment is that they didn't do any research protocol around that, but we did publish it as a quality improvement project.
Hospital-acquired pressure injury.
Pressure injury, that's it, thank you. Hospital-acquired pressure injury, HAPPY. Yes. There's also been a lot of connection made with OB. OB has been making connections between simulation and patient outcomes for 20 years. A lot of it is it's skills, right? You teach certain skills and then the time to action is faster, and so the outcomes are better. What's a little harder to measure is teamwork and communication and things like that. Did that answer the question?
Sí, muchísimas gracias. Tenemos algunas preguntas en nuestro chat virtual, entonces ahorita vamos a leer algunas, por favor. Muchísimas gracias, Kim.
Sure.
Le voy a leer una de nuestros participantes. En cuanto al aprendizaje a su propio ritmo, ¿Qué herramienta sugiere con mayor firmeza para evaluar el trabajo que va realizando el estudiante?
It would depend on the type of activity they were doing at their own pace. So if they're doing virtual reality at their own pace, then there's feedback within the virtual reality system that can tell them, like, let's say that they're practicing endoscopies. So inside the endoscopy machine, it will say how deep they went, how much pressure they applied, if they had the right angle or not. And then that's just to get the tube in. And then, there'll be a variety of different abnormalities that they can see and diagnose, and then the machine will tell them that as well. Even with an ultrasound guided examination, the machine will say, how deep did that needle go? Or a breast exam, how much pressure did you apply? And how big was the lump that you felt? So those types of things, we've got the machine that can provide that feedback. If they're doing something in front of us, then we're fairly well obliged to use a traditional checklist. But the checklists are challenging because you all know they're way too long. I mean, a simple checklist to put in a urinary catheter has over 30 steps on it. And so it becomes a memorization exercise without any kind of critical thinking at all. And so, that's an interesting dilemma, because I don't really want my students memorizing just to get everything in the right order. Because when I look at that checklist, there's things that could go in any number of order. As long as you've got your sterile technique maintained, then it doesn't have to, most of those checklists don't have to go specifically in order. But when you've got brand new students that are really at the novice, concrete thinking level, they only know how to memorize checklists. It's not until they become more advanced beginner learners that they start to think more abstractly, and they can like color outside the lines, if you will, and they can start to do things a little different. Because if you take an expert and give them that same skill to do, they'll do it in 20 steps and not 36, and they'll still do it right. So there's challenges with checklists as well.
Thank you very much, Kim. ¿Hay alguien de la audiencia que quiera hacer alguna otra pregunta para Kim? Ok, entonces leeremos a alguien más del chat. Mencionan que sí, que muchas gracias, Kim. Sí contestaste la pregunta. Y le voy a leer la pregunta en inglés.
Thanks.
Thanks for the presentation. What opinion do you have between the use of checklist versus the rubric?
Checklist versus rubric. Well, I haven't really thought about that, but I'll tell you what comes up at the top of my head. When I think about checklists, I think simple, yes, no, yes, no. Either this, it's skills, right? So either the student did the required task, or they didn't do it. And then secondly, did they do it in order? Not necessarily, like I just said, not necessarily the order of the checklist, but a logical order. Like if they're doing an assessment, I don't care if they listen to the right lower quadrant of the abdomen and then the right upper quadrant and then the left upper quadrant and the left lower quadrant. I don't care. I would like to see them evaluate the abdomen for bowel sounds in whatever order they want. But when I think about rubrics, when I think about observation rubrics, they're usually not yes or no. It's some degree of something. So I'm thinking specifically about the facilitator competency rubric. There's an activity that the facilitator should do. And it's not about how well they did it. It's about at what level of ability did they do it. So did they do it the way that somebody who's brand new in simulation would do it? Or did they do it at the level that somebody who's, been doing it for 2 years does it, Or do they do it at the level of a beginner, but they should be doing it at the level of somebody who's been doing it 2 years? When we created the facilitator competency rubric, the purpose behind it at that time was because we had to train hundreds of nurses across a 16 campus nursing college. And we needed to train the trainer because the 3 of us couldn't do it all. But we're like, well, how are we going to know who's any good at this? So we created this rubric purposely to find out who needed to be taught and who was at the expert level who could teach them. And then the competent people in between, we weren't going to lean on them for any of the teaching, but it did help us to know who was at that level that we could continue to build up towards advanced and expert levels. So that's how I see the difference. I see the checklist as more of a yes or no, and the rubric as more of a continuum. And I know there's exceptions to that. I know there are, but that's how I differentiate them in my head.
Of course. Thank you very much, Kim. There is another last questions in here in our audience. I will lend the word to Dr. Vinay.
Okay. Kim, dos puntos. Un comentario. Primero, agradecerte infinitamente por haber aceptado estar aquí con nosotros en SIMex. Sé que hay una diferencia de horario. Estás en Qatar en el Mundial. Me imagino que esto es una algarabía en tu país, pero te agradezco infinitamente a nombre de SIMex que tú estés ahorita aquí con nosotros y que compartas experiencia. El segundo punto. ¿Qué nos recomendarías a los educadores que hagamos para que los estudiantes vean la evaluación como aprendizaje, transformar ese pensamiento que tienen que me evalúan, me están calificando, me están puntando? ¿Cómo transformar eso? Sé que es algo complejo, pero ¿qué nos recomendarías a los educadores? Gracias.
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, thanks. I really am happy to be here with you this evening. It is a little bit past my bedtime, which might be why it's taken me a little while to think of my answers, but I really appreciate this opportunity. So to make it okay for students to be evaluated, I think there's 2 things that you need to consider. First, I think you need to show them it's okay for you to be evaluated. And so here's a way to do that. Quick, easy way to do it. The Dash tool has a student version for the students to evaluate their debriefers. It's a great place to start. Then there's also a version where you can evaluate each other. So but it's not easy to do this because that's a major culture shift, right? We don't want our students sitting there and evaluating us because we might do something wrong. And then we'll look bad in front of our students. But if we're all there to learn, then isn't it okay if you do something wrong? Because then you're going to learn from that. So I think that's one place to start. But even more important than that is you have to work on creating this psychologically safe environment where it's okay for a student to tell an instructor that there's an area that they could improve on. That's big. I mean, that would be fantastic if you guys could work on something like that. You know, maybe even if it's just a test run, a trial, a pilot study of some kind. I do know one school in the US who's done that very successfully with their faculty. So I don't think they've had the students evaluating them, but they evaluate each other. And the person who's been doing it the longest goes first. All right. And she's always happy to accept the feedback. And that's the other piece of it. If you're going to do this, you have to gracefully and gratefully accept the feedback, because for people to be brave enough to give you that feedback, you have to accept it with gratitude, because that's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of bravery on their part.
Thank you very much, Kim. Well, Kim, thank you very much for being here with us in SIMex 2022. We are really glad that you could join us. We hope you enjoy these meetings. We will see you probably next year. And thank you once more time.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of the conference.